I made a video about 6 years ago, about 4 years after I stopped drinking alcohol, 5 years after we'd left Ireland, and it was the first time I'd gone back to Ireland sober, without any alcohol. I've been back to Ireland quite a few times since. The last time we went for 5 weeks, and I've just learned so many different lessons in that journey. There's a lot of time for thinking, and I think now that I'm in my 10th year, I've had a lot of chances to think about a lot of time that has gone by. Like I said, we've gone back to Ireland quite a few times, and things have changed in my mind. I think that's the key. It's just to have that chance to think about things properly, to develop your thoughts, to go back and digest this stuff, absorb a lot of the information, and come to some conclusion about what we've done, about what I've done. The first big lesson that I've learned is that things change when and if you change. If you change the way you do things, things are going to automatically change. I mean, things change anyway, right? It's just whether or not you direct those changes, or you direct some of the more important changes in your life. In the last video, I said that friendships and places, all those kind of things, that they didn't hold the same kind of attraction for me anymore. I think people get locked into an idea about themselves, a way of looking at themselves. They get locked into a certain meaning, a way of seeing themselves, seeing the meaning in their lives. But you can change these things. The meaning is just your interpretation of what's going on. The meaning is what you attach to it. And these are things that you can most certainly change. 20 years ago, the world was a lot bigger than it is now. The world has become a smaller place. You've got a lot more potential in your life now than you used to have. I think that really translates into, if you want to change things, if you want to change where you are, if you want to change the people around you, you can do. There is nothing that stops you from doing that. The second thing is that habits die hard, but they do die in an odd kind of a way. They do for the most part die. An example of that again is going back to Ireland. When I went back to Ireland after 4 years, it was really amazing how much I was slipping back into old ways of thinking. I'd lived in Ireland for so many years of my life, and going back into walking down the same streets and going back to some of the forestry tracks that we used to work on, it was kind of depressing for me in a certain way, because I'd moved on in so many different ways. I hadn't drank in 4 years, and I changed my life in so many different ways. So to go back to that and to have some of those old ways of thinking sort of coming back into my mind, or that's the way I was feeling at the time, that was kind of depressing. But the last time I went back to Ireland, none of that was happening. I even had some 0.0 Guinness for the first time. So I had Guinness for the first time that tasted very similar to what I was used to, or it seemed like it did. And it was just a different experience. But it just shows you that all of those things, once you do put time under your belt, some things are going to take longer than others. And because I'd gone back to Ireland originally after 4 years, I hadn't really extinguished a lot of those habits. This is a completely different place to Spain. It was almost like stepping back in time a little bit, even though it was 4 years had gone by. That feeling was I hadn't really extinguished those habits because I hadn't been there to extinguish them. In order to extinguish a lot of these habits, you've got to go through the process of walking down those same streets over and over again. And gradually those feelings will change, that your feelings will now be associated with your new way of thinking instead of your old. So, in my case, I didn't do that for a long time. And it just took a while. That's just the way of it. And that brings me nicely on to number 3, which is that places have time traps. You think that by going through these, going through the time is a great healer, that you're going to be able to go back to all places that you used to go to fairly quickly, and nothing's going to, everything's going to change, and you're going to think about things in a different way. But it's just not the case. One of the things that really struck me, and to an extent the last time I went back to Ireland, was my friends, my old friends, they just seemed like they were stuck in a time trap. But it was also because of the place they were living. Remember years ago, before I had a car in Ireland, or we hadn't got a car for a while, and I was hitching around going down from Ennis to Kilrush, which is probably
20 or 30 kilometers, something like that, maybe more. Anyway, hitching this road, and I was talking to this farmer, and he'd been in the States for a long time, which is a case for a lot of Irish people. They go over to the States, spend a bit of time over there, work over there, and then come back. But it gives them a different perspective. And he was saying, he says, it's one of the problems with people who've never gone anywhere, you know, who've tended the farm, or they've just spent their whole lives in one area. And it's not just Clare, it could be anywhere in the world. If your perspective is only one perspective of one place, of one way of thinking, of one way of doing things, it really does alter the way that you think about yourself and think about your own journey. And it's the same thing with alcohol. You know, when your perspective is that you can only have fun with alcohol, you can only socialize if you're drinking, and that's the way you've been brought up. And that's the way I was for 30 years. You know, just thinking that this was the way that things were. And this is the way that you are a man, in this sense that you need to drink, you need to smoke, you need to do whatever, you know. And it's only when you stop doing that. You know, I was a vegan for 8 years, and that sort of gave me a different perspective on the food that I was eating. I'm not a vegan anymore, but that was because I could see things from a different perspective. I started seeing my health from a different perspective. And it's all an individual thing, right? But it's only when you step outside of those places and those times that you can really get a different perspective on how you are and how you react and how your life is turning out.
The fourth thing, and again, it's associated with the places that you're living in, and it's something that I've learned over my time, and this was a huge lesson for me. Huge lesson. There's a certain energy in places as well, and there's a certain energy trap in places. You know, it's not just the place, it's the people. If you change the place, then you can change that energy. Ireland was a place that made me want to drink. That's what I was talking about in that video. That Ireland was a place that made me want to drink in the first place. You know, the place wasn't the only thing, but it was definitely one of them. And to get rid of the habits, you have to change a lot about what makes up your life. What parts of your life are made up of what? You know, how do you know what to do? How do you know what parts of your life are made up what? You know, a lot of the time, only time and practice is gonna give you this. Only time and practice and doing. These are the things that are going to tell you exactly what changes to make in your life. But changes on this scale, they don't happen overnight. These kind of changes happen bit by bit over a long time. But they're well worth the effort. They're well worth the sacrifice. They're well worth thinking about, making sure that you understand them. You know, making the changes, experimenting with changes. So if you want to change your energy, it really does help to even think about changing your circumstances, change your surroundings. And finally, number 5, none of this matters in the long term, in the grand scheme of things, right? I'm talking about this from the perspective of a lot of people look at their past and they view themselves where they are now from the perspective of where they've come from, you know, what the journey that they've gone through. And you know, I like looking at my past. I like looking at certain things about myself, but I try not to let it define me. You know, going back to Ireland all those times, going back to my alcohol past all those times, has helped me to realize that I've moved on from that. Even though I go back to that now, I take my new self back to that old situation, and I impose my new self on that old situation. So no matter what I did in the past, it's not affecting me anymore. I mean, going back and seeing some of my old buddies, and seeing one or two of them in particular that have really suffered because of their drinking, you know, that's hurtful. But that's their choice. You know, my choice was to leave there. They could have done the same thing, and they didn't. I made the choice to leave, and I did. So you've always got that in your bag, that you can up sticks and leave. You can go. I think it was Morgan Freeman says the bus leaves every day. I think it's great advice. You know, you don't have to stay where you are. Don't make excuses saying that you can't because of this or that or the other. It's the meaning that you put on these things. You know, like I said, the world is a much smaller place now. So even leaving family behind, you know, leaving family behind 100 years ago meant that you never saw them again. You know, you were lucky if you had a telephone call with them, you know, once or twice in a lifetime, but you never saw them again. Now it's like, you know, people go to the other side of the world for a week's vacation. You know, the world is a much smaller place now, so you don't have to live around the corner from your family. The only place that you can live your life is in the present. It's in now. This is what matters more than anything else. And just because you lived a certain way in the past doesn't mean to say that you have to carry on living like that. You have to think about what you want to do now and how that's going to affect your future. Because one thing's for sure, there's no way you're going to affect your past, right? The only place that you can affect your past is up here in the way you interpret things. In a weird kind of a way, stopping drinking alcohol allows you to have a fresh start. It allows you to, I suppose, live your childhood again, or to live a second childhood, to go through that experience of discovery, to go through there's a certain innocence when you stop drinking alcohol, because even though you've got all this experience of where you are, what you're facing into, a lot of that is the unknown. A lot of that is going to require a lot of experimentation, of you letting go of a lot of the shit that's happened before you, you know, and just starting out from afresh. You know, it's like you're discovering life for the first time. And I think that's a good way of looking at it, you know. We can never get back to what we were before we stopped drinking alcohol, but what we can get to, the potential that we can get to, maybe that's far greater. So I want you to look at this one next, 4 flukes that I had from stopping drinking. It's just 4 of the things that randomly happened. Take care, onwards and upwards. Bye now.